Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I have my iPad next to me to tell me if I am. Don't know why I'm a little bit paranoid. My internet has been acting up all day, but I am connected over Ethernet, so hopefully that helps a little bit. Hopefully it's just, I don't know, my router don't liking the humidity in the air or something like that. I'm back a little bit sooner than I expected. We have a lot of news just being piled up over the last couple of days and weeks. So the lull leading up to Dub Dub is kind of over, while we don't have actually a lot of news specifically for Dub Dub. We do have a lot more stuff, and thank you. The last video is performing pretty well with the Xiaomi X Ring 01 processor, so I generously for the algorithm included some processor talk today. It's not going to be as in-depth as in the last video, but still. I see already Angelica joining chat, Steve leaving a generous €6 super chat, saying, sorry I missed your last few live streams. Here's a coin to my favorite streamer. Aw, I love both the money, the shout out to favorite streamer, and even more the reference to The Witcher. We'll be watching you during gym time. Well, good success to you. I'm going to the gym tomorrow, so let's see if I'll be streaming tomorrow. It's gonna be a difficult timeline. Riley joining the chat, and Rosa. Hello to everyone. So glad you found me. The last stream has been performing better, so hopefully this one is gonna do decently too. YouTube is kind of known to punish streamers who go on hiatuses, and I already didn't have the most predictable time schedule, let's put it that way. So thank you to anyone who finds me live, to anybody who watches the videos afterwards. And before we fully start, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and comment. You guys know I love interacting with a lively comment section, getting your agreements, your disagreements, and of course you can support me live. You see already the super chat from Steve that you can do as well. You can also become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. The link for that is in the description of this channel. Let's actually dive right into something that is very near and dear to my wrist, I guess, even though I'm not wearing my Apple Watch today. And that is a two-parter coming from Mark Gurman, and it's not part of the Power and newsletter. I guess he might have been afraid that somebody would leak this first. I also think that people like me have been pushing back against this rumor for weeks and months. And I think that after probably some more careful questioning of his sources, he actually found out that this rumor was garbage, and he mixed up like a prototype with actually something that was gonna go into production. Now, Mark Gurman is not gonna comment on it that way, but I promise you that's most likely what happened. And I'm not usually calling people liars, but when Minchi Kuo is presenting a completely different prediction for AirPods, saying they will have IR cameras rather than regular cameras, nobody but Mark Gurman is even remotely talking about camera-enabled Apple Watches, not even after Mark Gurman reported on it, right? Like, other people didn't copy paste that rumor, and other people didn't say, oh, my sources are confirming it either. And that's usually what happens pretty quickly after such a big rumor comes out. So we got a big kind of like deletion here. It's not like he even like detracts it officially, like, oh, I was wrong. No, he is saying it's canceled, which is what always happens. Products that might have always been, you know what, Apple works on everything at every time, right? Everything everywhere all at once, all the prototypes you can imagine. And then a leaker like Mark Gurman gets his hands or ears on what is happening, and he will immediately like have to claim, oh, what's the time schedule and stuff like that. And I promise you, unfortunately, a lot of that is made up or is based on very, very shoddy reporting. Like, what happened with the iMac, for example, right? All those reports leading up to it. At this point, it should have simply launched just because Apple apparently was building it for such a long time. Nobody's saying it's canceled, they're just saying it's pushed. But what hardware will it have at that point? So this is me kind of like celebrating myself a little bit, and I guess celebrating media literacy as a competence that you can acquire. And then there's also a more interesting part, which is a more positive rumor coming from Mark Gurman, saying Apple plans glasses for 2026. But then he also contextualizes it as part of AI push, always forgetting that Apple is still primarily a hardware company, and Apple's most successful services have nothing to do with AI. So let's get started here, right? I'll read through the report. The reason why I actually want to read it on Bloomberg, for one, I am paying for Mark Gurman's reporting on Bloomberg, but also the summaries on sites like 95Mac, Mac Rumors, Cult of Mac, where we all usually go for those kinds of summaries, they are very basic, and they are, in my opinion, they leave out a little bit of nuance that is part of the way he is reporting here. So, Apple Inc. is aiming to release smart glasses at the end of next year as a part of a push into AI-enhanced gadgets, which is funny because in the very same article, he will claim that one such AI-enhanced gadget is getting canceled. Also, just because a gadget is AI-enhanced doesn't mean that that's the push. Like, from everything we have heard, even leading up to Apple Vision Pro, is that Apple wants to make glasses, wanted to make them for like the better part of a decade, right? In fact, even Steve talked about how you could put computing potentially like directly in front of your face, the way that headphones in that point, not AirPods, kind of allow you to have some amount of computing right in your ears, right? So to try always contextualize everything with AI, I don't honestly think that this is an Apple push. And some will say, well, what about all the built for Apple intelligence marketing that Apple has for iPhones and iPads? Well, you kind of answered it yourself. Apple is marketing AI with every gadget, and every gadget with AI. That does not mean that glasses wouldn't exist if it weren't for AI, nor does it mean that Apple would stop working on AI if it weren't for specific gadgets. So this is a Mark Gurman addendum, I'm almost 100% sure, because Mark Gurman himself has reported in the past that Tim Cook is kind of internally obsessed with glasses, and not obsessed because of AI, but because he believes that this is a forward-looking, very future-proof form factor to eventually maybe not quite replace the iPhone, but enhance it and still keep Apple relevant as maybe other companies make glasses more and more relevant in the industry. But, and now we're back to Gurman reporting, it, being Apple, has shelved plans for a smartphone that can analyze its surrounding with a built-in camera. Now, this is, again, the reporting that I have criticized time and time again when looking at Mark Gurman mentioning it. It should be noted, Mark Gurman has never truly doubled down on this watch. In fact, he seems more sure of the AirPods with cameras, and I am more inclined to believe those than the watch, though I do think the AirPods are also completely fake with cameras. I think they are prototypes that Apple tried out. I think there is technology like IR cameras for stuff like air gestures that Apple might be exploring. Cameras on a product that you always have with you. Like with glasses, it's a little bit different. With glasses, you expect to be seen by someone's eyes, right? But imagine, and this is a crazy example I gave like last stream. Imagine standing next to someone at the urinal, my guys here, Hope you can feel with that, right? And you don't know, oh, are the AirPods of the other guy potentially filming me, right? What about the Apple Watch? And it's not just about Apple, right? Because if Apple brings out these products, you bet your ass they will be copied. So Apple will inherit the backlash that other similar products might get. We saw that with AirTags, right? AirTags are some of the most like stalker safe tracking gadgets. They aren't perfect, I'll admit that, but they have been built with that privacy consideration more so than any other tracking gadget before it. And guess what? Apple still got shit for the general distrust that a lot of the audience had against those other gadgets. In fact, it wasn't until people actually started using AirTags that they realized, oh, they're specifically limited in certain ways that wouldn't allow stalking. And if they allow stalking, then basically that person would be able to stalk you anyway, right? Like if they're actually willing to drill in and disable the speaker in a specific way, like that's just not really what's going to happen. So again, smartwatches with cameras are a terrible idea. I've always said that. And Mark Gurman now claims that Apple has shelved plans for a smartphone that can analyze its surrounding with a built-in camera. However, I will counter that, and I will claim that Apple never truly planned to release such a smartwatch. They might have experimented with it a little bit. They might have tried it out, have seen, oh, what kind of camera can we put in it? What's the privacy implementation? How would we deal with that, right? And eventually they said, you know what? It's not going to work. We're not going to try that. It would take away internal space. It would add cost to the build, and it would present potential backlash by the media, the average consumer. So this shelving of plans is basically a prototype not going through the validation process. And I'm sorry, Mark Gurman, it was never really planned for any specific time frame. If somebody told you that, you were misled, and I'm glad that you're getting the real story now. Sorry if I sound arrogant here, but this is the kind of like rumor shit that sometimes happens. Like, I got stuff wrong. I thought that M3 Ultra wouldn't be a thing, right? But that's because it was a very last minute addition to the rumors surrounding the Mac Studio. And I was like, really? Why? Right? And if it had actually been reported on 3-4 months ago, before the release of the newest Mac Studio with the M4 Max and the M3 Ultra, and somebody would have said, well, Apple basically has M3 Max dies lying around, right? I would be totally fine with that. Now, since we had all that long time to deal with this rumor, and now I have been proven correct, I will be tasting the laurels here. So, companies' engineers are ramping up work on the glasses, a rival to Meta Platform's popular Ray-Bans. So, there is so much wrong in this sentence. First of all, this is not going to be a rival. Like, if you think that Apple is worried or trying to match the capabilities of Ray-Bans, if you also think they are popular because they didn't sell like zero, like, sorry guys, if Apple launched like something also in partnership, by the way, with a big brand like Ray-Bans, right? And they got the sales numbers that we are seeing for those, people would claim it's a failure. And you know why we know that? People claimed Apple Vision Pro, a $3,500 minimum VR headset, is a failure, even though it sold roughly 500,000 units. Which is absolutely like way over what you would ever expect, like such an expensive product in that category to sell. We know that, for example, the $500 Meta Quest is selling way better, but yes, it's 7 times less expensive. So I'm just flabbergasted that Mark Gurman is always like, he always likes to bring up other companies, right? Because that's kind of where you get like your success, I guess, you bring up AI, you bring up competitors, right? If you just report on Apple, you kind of look like me, right? You look like a streamer guy just reacting to everything. Maybe you have internal sources, but you're not that serious. If you actually want to be seen as an analyst, no matter how unrealistic that actually is, because you are a leaker guy, which is still a respectable thing to be, you kind of have to include all this shit. He's saying there's a bit to meet the year-end target 2026, which is crazy because there has been nothing to suggest that we're gonna get that. In fact, Mark Gurman just last week wrote that Apple's big product like attack is gonna come in 2027. Foldable iPhones, though the first foldable iPhones is supposedly coming by end of 2026. That we would be getting. What did he all bring up for 2027? I already forget because oh yeah, the redesigned iPhone 20 basically, or iPhone XX or whatever. Yeah, so now he is kind of going against his own reporting, because this would be the biggest thing, what, since Apple Watch for Apple, right? If it might not be even bigger, especially if it succeeds. So why wouldn't he have mentioned it for like saying that Apple's product Blitzkrieg is actually starting in 2026? So did he get completely new information like in the last week? I don't know. It's according to people with knowledge of the matter. Whatever. Apple will start producing large quantities of prototypes at the end of this year with overseas suppliers, said the people. Blah, 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 asked to not to be identified. The iPhone maker is looking to join the emerging trend of AI-powered devices. Nothing here suggests to me. He brings up Johnny Ive here. I've already given more than my 2 cents on this story. The artificial intelligence pioneer, that's coming because Steve Altman, OpenAI, bought Johnny Ive's company, is acquiring Ive's Secretive.io startup with the goal of releasing a family of AI devices. I've already seen people laughing at this, comparing it, and that's not just me, to like the Humane AI pin and all that shit. So he's making this look as if this is some kind of like big deal. It's really not. It's just yet another packaging technology for AI. Apple's glasses would have cameras, microphones, and speakers, allowing them to analyze the external world and take requests via the Siri voice assistant. They could also handle tasks such as phone calls, music playback, live translations, and turn-by-turn directions. So if this is actually correct, then this makes sense. I could also believe that this is basically him just summarizing what others have already like kind of pushed with glasses. The approach would be similar to that of Meta's current glasses, Jesus Christ, and upcoming devices for like running Alphabet's Android XR operating system. Of course, that one is for VR headset, mixed reality headsets, and all the way down to glasses. I fully believe that Apple will use the expertise they have gained from Apple Vision Pro. Who knows, by that time, an Apple Vision Air, or at least a Pro 2, all the refinements to Vision OS. By that point, we would be at Vision OS 4, getting Vision OS 3, and then Vision OS 4 next year. So Apple should have, by that point, by late 2026, or maybe the product gets delayed into some point of 2027. It could also be that Apple announces it by late 2026, but then actually launches it somewhere mid-2027. It depends. Anything is possible. I don't believe in concrete timelines. This is the kind of product that Apple won't rush, and it's the kind of product that cannot afford to come out unpolished. Unless it's dirt cheap, but I doubt that would be the case. The stock price is completely irrelevant. The stock price is fluctuating very much because of the crazy US government right now, threatening tariffs on smartphones and all that shit. So that has very little to do with these rumors. The glasses were originally dubbed N50. now carry an umbrella descriptor of N401, the name of a broader project exploring the category. This means, of course, that the exact form factor of the glasses could still be subject to change. I would also argue there's a chance that stuff like this could get merged with like an Apple Vision Air. Maybe at first Apple doesn't still see glasses as like a viable category, the tech not being ready, battery life not being good enough, right? So maybe they make Apple Vision Air a lot slimmer and thinner than we actually expect. So this would explain why they're not targeting like a very specific product code name. Apple's ultimate goal is to release a pair of spectacles with augmented reality. That makes sense. I mean, Tim Cook has been talking about AR way before he has talked about AI or even mentioned fucking crypto and all that shit that were, and NFTs that were like hyped for a while in the tech space. So yeah, augmented reality absolutely is going to be a long-term thing. Whether or not that pans out can remain to be seen. I mean, there is a chance that maybe Tim Cook really values it, but the next CEO might not. So it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out, right? Which uses displays and other technology. We've seen like holographic projectors or just laser projectors going onto like the glass so you can still see it. We've also even seen it like being beamed directly into your eye. So it will depend what Apple decides is feasible, what's affordable enough to put it into a realistic product that millions will buy. Yeah, but that makes a lot of sense. It will superimpose digital content on views of the real world, but those remain years away. So basically, he is saying that these ones will be more limited than Apple's ultimate goal, which he has talked about in the past, saying that Apple doesn't actually believe the technology for that to be ready. So while he does basically call it Apple glasses or Apple Glass or whatever, he is not really talking about the same glasses that he has talked about before, which he has kind of more talked about as being, I guess, more of like a 2030 kind of product. When he talks about it being years and years away, this coming at the end of next year would suggest it's a more limited accessory, very much depending to be paired with your iPhone, very much depending on the compute power of your iPhone. So yeah, and down the road, supposedly maybe glasses could be just as good as your smartphone in some ways. But then again, seeing the slow pace of miniaturization for processors, modem technologies, cameras, it's really hard for me to imagine that like fashionable and small size glasses could get to that level like in the next decade or so. Like, do I believe they could give you that experience if they mostly like offload those compute needs to your smartphone? Yeah, I do think that. Hopefully the like internal displays and stuff will be good enough, but fully independent products probably still years and years away. And I'm glad that Mark Gurman at least isn't claiming that that is what's coming next year. Because at that point, I would be saying it's just as shit as his prediction about Apple Watches with cameras. Yeah, but that's about it. Actually, kind of for Apple today. We have more stuff to look into. First, I would actually like to look at GSM Arena's review of the Galaxy S25 Edge. Now, there are YouTube videos about it, like Phone Arena mainly talks about battery life, but they aren't that great, like long reviews. If over the next couple of days and stuff, we get like a review from MKBHD or Mr. Who's the Boss, I'll look in into reacting to that, depending a little bit on my time schedule. But actually, I think we are kind of better off reading today, which is probably worse for my voice, but whatever. So what I like about GSM Arena is I don't really care about people saying, "Oh, this device feels sexy" or whatever. That's interesting if I actually consider buying a product. Like, how does it feel? How does it look? Right? But the base functionality has been good enough for me to even care. So, and they are mostly focused on like hard data, like display brightness, benchmarks, sustained performance, battery life, even speaker tests. So, let me get through some of those things. First of all, the display brightness is once again pretty disappointing, given that, and I've seen some of you guys comment in previous videos where it's like, well, Samsung should be getting the best displays because, well, there's Samsung Mobile and there's Samsung Display. Well, guess what? No, it's not. It should also be noted that unlike the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which benefits from its great anti-reflective coating, this one does not. So you get the lower brightness than competitive flagships, but you get it without the benefit that could actually overcome that shortcoming. So not too great for a 1099 product, unfortunately. It's also surprising. They're saying it's the color depth is 8-bit. I guess I don't know why. Like maybe they're using like an old display controller, or maybe they're just referring to like the HDR implementation. Like Dolby Vision is not supported. That's fine, but yeah, that could also just be the downside of using an older panel. I mean, I believe the S25 Edge doesn't have a 10-bit either, so that's unfortunately pretty disappointing. Riley, bro, just quotes me and says some of you. No, no, no. Yeah, I did quote you during the live stream. That's true. Though there are people, and it used to be way more when I was still on Twitter, but like I see people commenting on stuff like Blue Sky and threads and forums, right? And also, it's just a very popular misunderstanding of Samsung, right? This idea that Samsung always gets the best storage, the best RAM, the best display from their own like subdivisions. That's just not true. Those divisions chase money way more over benefiting Samsung Mobile. I would argue that there used to be a time when Samsung was very much like almost like an not exclusive in the sense of like, oh, they're the only ones, but exclusive in the sense of, oh, we get very much first access. I would argue that probably until like the Galaxy S8 9 days that was the case. Yeah, but it's really not been that great, unfortunately. The next is battery life, and this one is actually not terrible, I guess, but then again, that's measuring versus like the Galaxy S25 Plus and Ultra, which aren't the best ships these days anymore. In fact, even looking at the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, you will find that with less than 10% more capacity, it does deliver a decent amount more battery life. So that's important because previously, a lot of Chinese flagships delivered very underwhelming battery life in tests like these. You can kind of even see that a little bit with the X200 Pro, right? You see that with a 6,000 milliamp hours, sure, it gives you a bit more battery life than Samsung with 5,000, but really not as much as you would suspect from a 20% larger battery. In fact, we see it like being inferior in terms of media playback. That could be a difference between using the X Elite and the Dimensity 9400. Gaming time, again, Adreno GPU versus like the ARM designed GPU. It wins in browsing, and I guess that's probably something that like Vivo can have a little bit more control over, something that might be a little bit less dependent on like the raw power of the chip. But then you also see it like absolutely failing in modem work by having atrocious battery life when it comes to call times for its battery capacity. But then again, call battery life, for one, I do not think it's very relevant for today. like as long as it's like over 20 hours, you're fine. But I also think that it really like depends on the specific implementation, right? During web browsing, as long as the web is responsive and you can match like the display brightness, that's basically a relevant comparison. But with call, I always wonder, like, do they assume that the call quality is always the same? Because call quality can be ridiculously different, right? Like iPhones have one more microphones than even like the Galaxy S Ultra devices. So I always just wonder why this is still included. But if you go to this and you actually say, you know what, I don't actually care about phone times, you can still make yourself like a comparison here. I call like 5 minutes a day max. I call for about an hour a day. That's because I live away from my family. So I call my mom, my grandma, my cousin, who is basically like a sister to me. But yeah, with most of my buddies, I just chat, and with some of my better friends I do video calls. So yeah, but you can actually rationalize this away, at which point it still doesn't look good. In fact, now you can really see that like this battery is like 25% larger, but the display is a bit larger too. So that kind of explains this difference perfectly. And yeah, the 16 Pro Max, still absolutely phenomenal. I guess if you really care about gaming, like the iPhone is kind of on par with the rest, but I think that these are like much more important metrics for like your day-to-day usage. If you are actually a heavy gamer, you will still benefit from having like an external battery pack, right? However, even if you're like a very heavy YouTube viewer and a very heavy browser user, right, you will get through the day with these numbers. With gaming, depending on how bright you have to make the screen and whether you're using it on 5G or Wi-Fi, and how good even the carrier connectivity is in your area, you will not get through the day if you're playing games like Resident Evil on the go on your iPhone. So yeah, just trying to explain this data, I really think this is a great way to measure it. Having like discrete categories and then being able to adjust what percentage means to you. So that's pretty cool. Charging time, not the fastest. It's not terrible because the battery capacity is not actually bad. The speakers are definitely not the greatest, so we are moving away from like very good or even excellent things here. And they are specifically calling out that less room also means less bass, a more thin profile. Well, because of the thin profile of the chassis, it's less loud, and you can clearly hear the difference. So I would actually love to hear like a Max Tech like comparison where they put like the microphones very close to each other. I know there are like songs here, but I don't get too much out of this data. So you can decide for yourself if that matters to you. However, what does matter to me is actually sustained performance. Now we see that in terms of peak performance, it does give you very similar results to the S25 Ultra. I really am surprised by the Antutu discrepancy here, where devices like the Xiaomi 15 Ultra just have like a generational 20% lead over Samsung. So I'm just really confused by the implementation of a processor that was supposed to be better, right? Like they gave it a special name. And then, yeah, I've also always talked about how these benchmarks do not really reflect real world games, like especially not Wildlife Extreme. So this is something that I've notoriously criticized GSM Arena for using. Even outlets like Geekervan, who I've also criticized for using that, have at least moved forward to Steel Nomad Lite. So yeah, this is pretty much worthless data. However, What is important is sustained performance, and GSM Arena summarizes it at it being not great, as one would expect from a thin chassis like this one. The Snapdragon 8 Elite CPU started throttling within first 5 minutes of the CPU test, while the GPU stability score is below 50%. You can expect considerable thermal throttling during long gaming sessions. So, stability of 44% is actually bad. And looking at the iPhone 16 Pro Max numbers, and again, I am comparing to the 16 Pro Max because they are very similar in size. So looking at the review, the GPU stability has increased from 74%, same test on iOS 18, to 90%, which is great. The CPU scored 78% of stability, so we are looking at way better sustained performance, way better stability here. In fact, these numbers actually kind of validate a little bit of what Geekervan is saying, right? Because when Geekervan is saying that, like, oh, iPhones perform like really underperform the competition at like 12 watts or whatever, it's like, yeah, because these phones are not designed even for like 10 watts of sustained wattage. The only phones that are designed for that kind of power consumption are actively cooled gaming phones, and once they get you to like 10 watts, then your battery life would be shit unless you're getting one of the 7,000 milliampere hour products. So yeah, this is like optimized to 5 to 6 watt peaks. So, and that absolutely makes sense with Apple saying that thermals have improved. We know that the 15 Pro Max roughly was better at like 4.5-ish watts. So think about 20% more, and now we're roughly at 5.5%, 5.5 watts, and that's how we get pretty good sustained performance numbers. But yeah, unfortunately, you won't see that when Geekervan only tests like games, 4 games, 3 out of which use basically the same engine. So. Yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate though, and this is the kind of like bad result that I hope that the iPhone 17 Air does not replicate. It should be noted, of course, that at least the Galaxy S25 Edge is a dual camera product. It has stereo speakers, so it will have advantages over the iPhone 17 Air, but I really hope that an A19 chip will give it better, at least like better sustained performance in the sense of the final results, right? But especially better sustained performance as a percentage of its designed peak. Plus, if the iPhone 17 Air actually comes out with 12 gigabytes of RAM, it will be the first time almost forever where the iPhone and the Galaxy basically have the same amount of memory, and that bodes really poorly for multitasking performance comparisons, especially if they are more demanding, right? Sure, when it comes to basic messaging apps and even YouTube, you can keep that shit for days in your memory, even on 6 gig of RAM devices, sometimes even on 4. I remember even my iPhone XS Max didn't struggle with tasks like that. But yeah, Samsung usually needs like 33, 50, sometimes 100% more memory to match the experience on the iPhone. This will not be a great look unless they really drop the price, because I do not think that the iPhone 17 Air is going to be $1,100. I think at worst it will start at $1,000. At really worst, it will start at $1,000 with 128 gigabytes. But I am more inclined to believe that it will cost $1,000 with 256 gigabytes. And sure, while you might argue, well, that will mean the prices are still relatively close. Yeah, but Apple is a very different brand from Samsung. And Apple will have a much larger customer base that is interested in thin and light products than Samsung. So like, I don't know who this product honestly was built for, and I can fully acknowledge it looks sleek, it looks sexy in some ways, it's relatively lightweight, especially for such a big screen product. But the fact that Samsung didn't wait until they had like an even more efficient chip, that's okay. I guess, like, we don't even know how much more efficient the 8 Elite 2 will be at that point, right? But they didn't wait until like a better screen, right? Which they definitely have. So I don't get why the S25 Edge isn't like the first Samsung device to get like the M14 material screen, like what's on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Like, this device is $100 cheaper than the 16 Pro Max, and it gives you worse performance, worse battery life, worse display brightness. It has one fewer camera. All of its cameras perform worse. So what is the justification for the price? Just that it's thin? And I will be saying the same criticisms for the iPhone 17 Air. Unless it's really cheap, if it is $800, I might even forgive it some of the shortcomings that otherwise I would see as irredeemable. But I just don't think it will. I think especially Samsung shot themselves in the foot with this price point. But they also kind of empowered Apple, right, to say, oh, this is $1099 MSRP. Who cares that you might even get it for $700 in a few months? Our device is $900 and $1,000 with the same amount of storage. And guess what? We might have the same amount of memory, but this is iOS versus Android. You can keep like twice as much in that memory. Yeah, so really confusing why this product isn't pushing some technical boundaries. Like, at least we know that the iPhone 17 Air, while the C1 modem doesn't push like technical boundaries, we know it's built for absolute efficiency. Why isn't this doing something like that? Like, Samsung has more efficient screens on their hand. Samsung has an anti-reflective coating on their hands that could allow you to use the phone at lower brightness levels and therefore help out with battery life as well, right? Why doesn't it introduce at least something new, like a new selfie camera? Like, if you look at the camera portion, it's almost one-to-one with the S25 Ultra. It seems that the main camera is a little bit less sharp, and night photos are very much dependent on you enabling night mode manually, but otherwise it is pretty much the main camera of the S25 Ultra. It's kind of an ultra wide from a generation ago, and it's a selfie camera also in line with like the second best flagships and something like that. And I don't even count as Apple as like the best in the selfie market. They have a pretty small sensor in that regard. So yeah, I'm not specifically disappointed because it's mostly in the realm of what I roughly expected, because we know all of those components, but I really don't understand why this was built beyond just to come out before the iPhone Air. So let me actually quickly look if there's anything more in the Apple world for us to report on. Because I hate it when like I do my streams and then I find out that right at the end of my stream I missed something. Oh yeah, there is actually one Apple thing that is pretty fascinating to me, though it does to me also come back to what I discussed with Mark Gurman's reporting, saying that Apple prototypes pretty much everything imaginable. That does not mean that those things are destined to come out anytime soon. So supposedly, Apple tested the M3 Ultra chip that is currently only available in the Mac Studio, not even on the Mac Pro. But Apple supposedly tested that chip in the MacBook Pro, which of course that would require completely different cooling. And it does account for both the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. So That's fascinating. If anything, if Apple ever brings out an Ultra chip for the MacBooks, I would be shocked if it weren't limited to just like the largest, most high-end configuration. Like you will have to get like 2 terabytes of storage minimum with it, minimum 64 gigs of RAM. At that point, well, probably like 96 or more. But yeah, apparently they tested it, J5 14D and J5 160, and ironically, it wasn't even found inside macOS, but it was found in an internal build of iOS running on an iPhone 16 engineering prototype. So obviously the code has references to other product. That makes perfect sense because whether it's through iTunes or even through like pairing through airdrop and whatever, right? Like other devices are aware of what models of other devices exist. So that's how you can find it. And of course, there's never been a MacBook Pro with an Ultra chip. I would doubt that the highest end version could even survive in anything close to resembling the cooling solution on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Like, I mean, even inside that MacBook Pro, they could go all out with cooling, don't get me wrong. But unless they make it a lot thicker, then it would eat up into other components like the great speakers or the very large battery, or even the very spacious trackpad. So, yeah, this to me seems like a prototype where they might have been playing around with cooling. Maybe they were like, oh my God, we have just such bad desktop sales. Maybe we can make it work on a laptop. And then they were like, yeah, nah. Let's bring it to the Mac Studio. Let's keep it updated a little bit more often. And maybe at some point we can even make the Mac Pro work, though probably not at the $7,000 starting price. Next is actually a big leak, though it ultimately doesn't mean much because the product looks very similar to last gen, and that is the Pixel 10. It has, well, once again, Google devices have been notorious for leaking early. Sometimes even like full-on reviews and hands-on videos have come out like weeks in advance and stuff like that. But now we got a more peculiar way of leaks, and somebody saw basically an Ask More of Your Phone ad being filmed for the Pixel 10, and they basically saw the Pixel there. Now, we also know here from the way that basically somebody got their hands on the ad structure, so we know that they are referencing, in fact, a Google Pixel 10. I know that from this perspective, it could basically be a Pixel 9. But yeah, this is a Pixel 10 ad being filmed. Now, there's nothing surprising here. We know that the 10 Pro and Pro XL and whatever are coming out later this year. The reason why I wanted to talk about this leak is because last year we actually got a lot of leaks, or specifically, we got one very large leak by Android Authority, and it was later corroborated by other sources like half a year later or so. But what's interesting to me is after watching Geek Event's review of the Xiaomi X-Ring 01, what really stuck out to me is that the Tensor G5 for late 2025 products might look bad again. Now, it probably won't look as bad as the Tensor G4 did back in the day. It definitely not as bad as like the Tensor G3 and stuff like that. But I am kind of starting to get a little worried that Google is just too far behind the other chip manufacturers. So the main reason here is that it starts with weird CPU decisions. First, it's an 8-core chip with one ARM Cortex X4 processor. So you're seeing that right. That's the same main performance core as on the previous Tensor G4. And that would make it a full generation behind of the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which uses its own, obviously, in-house cores. But it would put it behind the MediaTek 9400. Not even talking, and this is a rumor that came out just a few hours ago, that the Dimensity 9400 will use an all-new ARM supercore, which would be the successor to the X925, which people right now are calling the X1025. Now, we don't have any specific details. If that actually is going to be the case, what specific performance level it targets, how much more efficient it is, whether it's on N3E or on N3P potentially, right? But that makes sense, right? I would expect the Dimensity 9500 to upgrade from the X925 to something like an X1025 if we get a full new generation design this year. I would expect it to utilize A725 cores because they're more efficient than the A720 cores. Maybe they would use some new version of the 500 series, but that depends on if ARM even wants to launch them, right? That makes perfect sense. That is a very reasonable upgrade for a flagship chip in 2025. Not so much this. This would be 2 generations at that point behind against the Dimensity 9500. And given that those chips are comparable to like whatever Qualcomm is going to be bringing, that's just like, why? And we already see like, and I will bring that up. Oh, I actually forgot to open it. Samsung. Did I close that? Oh, Samsung 2500 Z Flip 7. Jesus, you switch language to English and literally nothing happens. It still shows you German. So crazy. Did they mention the rough makeup of this chip? I thought, yeah, it actually has. From Cortex 252. Cortex X5. Okay, back in the day they called it Cortex X5. It did become the X925. The naming was kind of switched. So I'll come up to this a little bit later because this is at least kind of understanding that the Exynos 2500 will not be completely flagship level because it was supposed to be more of a Galaxy S25 chip, but it was kind of delayed, right? So, however, for the Tensor G5, the fact that it's not even using an X925, which would be like, even if it used an X925, by that point it would kind of have to compete later on with products that came out with a newer version. But now it's like, why? The X4 is not that great anymore at this point, right? Especially for efficiency. Now, you can argue it's going to use the N3E node. So at least that is going to help it a lot versus a Samsung 4nm based processor. In fact, that is going to actually give us a very good comparison point between N3E and Samsung's like what? LPP plus at this point, right? It's like their third or fourth refinement of 4nm. So this would be the first time, I believe, that we get the exact kind of, I guess there is a lot that they could still do on the back end, but where we get, at least on its base, the same core. But then when it comes to the other cores, it does make more sense. Now, A520... yeah, hopefully there is finally something new. The only thing ARM really did for the A520 was actually just update it to be very much compatible with 3nm, be a little bit more efficient on that basis, be customizable in the amount of cache you can give it and stuff like that. The A725 actually, as we've seen in the Xiaomi X-Ring 01, is a very efficient and decently powerful chip. In fact, one that can actually, in some ways, sometimes perform a little bit like an X4. Definitely with lower power consumption than an X4. So you would kind of have like 5 A725 cores, and then one core that clocks a little bit higher than those two. It's really not a great pitch, unless Google still finds ways to make the Pixel relatively affordable. Though we have seen that even using Samsung's dirt cheap 4 nanometer node has not helped them that much. And now, obviously, 3 nanometer is probably like what 60% to twice as expensive, depending a little bit on the deal they got from Samsung, like per transistor. Let's even say it like let's say it's actually smaller in terms of area. Like, it's just not gonna be cheap to make. I just wonder what they're gonna do here. Yeah, so this not bad mid and little cluster. This very confusing, especially since X95 has like been specifically designed for N3E. So to not use it is just, you're shooting yourself in the foot at this point. But then there's also a brand new GPU, supposedly a 1.1 gigahertz GPU coming from an old friend of ours, Imagination Technologies, or IMG, which has been known to produce Apple GPUs in the past before Apple went in-house. And in fact, the company has been struggling ever since. So this is a little bit of a lifeline for them. It's also going to be more future-proof. It's going to support features like GPU virtualization and especially hardware-accelerated ray tracing. Now, its core amount is ridiculous. It's 2 cores, but then again, it's a completely different architecture. So I really have no reference points. From everything that we have seen is that this might not be targeting a high-end gaming experience, and they're just like kind of getting their foot in the game with like this GPU, seeing how it performs, and Google kind of wants to go like not necessarily in-house for all the parts, but they want better control, right? So instead of going to ARM for everything, right, the CPU cores, the GPU designs and whatever, they're like, you know what, if we go to individual partners, we might have better deals and leverage. We might be able to customize those things more. Because remember, what broke up Apple and NVIDIA on Apple's part is that Apple wasn't really able to dictate to NVIDIA, look, please, can you customize this to our liking a little bit more? And NVIDIA wanted actually more control over Apple's own drivers and APIs, right? So that broke them up. So Google kind of wants a little bit more of like the Apple Silicon experience, but they cannot design all those parts themselves. So instead of just saying, you know what, we're going to rely on one big proven guy like ARM itself, well, we kind of have to rely on them for the CPU designs because they are the best we can buy, really with an emphasis on buy, because you could, in theory, design something better. But for almost everything else, there will be a different memory controller here. There will be a new image signal processor. Some of that will design in-house, and where our expertise for in-house design is simply not enough, we'll go to somebody smaller, to somebody we have more leverage over financially. We're just a bigger company. We are probably one of their very few to only customers right now. And we're going to leverage that. We're going to have to see how performant it is. But yeah, it should at least be like architecturally much, much more interesting than the shit that Google has put into the Tensor G3. And then especially the Tensor G4 just being like a mild overclock. But also in actual benchmarks, it seemed to have performed a lot better. So yeah, it's really like these two chips really deserve our ridicule. It will come with ray tracing support. The second imperative is the support for GPU virtualization alongside the use of accelerated graphics in a virtual machine. It should be noted that while this is a more future-looking architecture GPU-wise, these features are supported on Adreno GPUs, ARM-based GPU designs. They could have partnered with AMD or NVIDIA. So I definitely think they did this because they probably got the lowest cost possible from IMG. And my other question here is really, will Google finally give us the cooling? Let's say this chip, like this GPU, performs surprisingly well. And even with the increased efficiency of N3, we see, like on the S25 Edge, how difficult it can be to cool even on an N3E processor. So yeah, definitely going to be interesting. There are also going to be improvements to the AI engine, which Google calls their TPU. They are continuously working on it, giving it more features. It benefits from faster memory bandwidth. But supposedly, we are looking at very similar architectural things. Now, they do have a nice increase in TOPS, but supposedly the only gain over the generation is in the 14% area. I couldn't tell you. Like maybe they're limited by the memory, or they're not giving it actually more cache to work with. So and is spelled N3 node. So it's 121 square millimeters. That would make it roughly in line with the MediaTek 9400 that we looked at and the Snapdragon 8 Elite. Notably, both those other chips include their modems on the die. I doubt that Google is going to do that because they're not designing in-house modems to include there. But it's going to be interesting how that plays out. Definitely, though, with more area, does not necessarily always come more performance. Google has been pretty bad on the back-end design, so it might just be that they literally need more space so each core can still be adequately cooled or something like that. While the specs of Google's upcoming Tensor G5 don't look super impressive on paper, it's worth remembering that it's still a chip that will be in a Pixel phone where software is arguably more important. So there's a little bit of coping going on there, but I do actually agree to a degree. If it came out with the X925 core when everybody else was switching to the 1025, but it therefore came with like a year of Google building drivers for that core, right? I would be like, fine. It might not be the absolute high end, but it's still very recent, good performant, good efficiency. But the X4 is just not that anymore, right? It was never super efficient. It was never the highest single core performance. So when you look at, do I have still me? Yeah. So that would be the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. So that one had even a custom design of it. That has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chip, which features an X4 chip, X4 core as its main performance cores, right? Looking at the performance level, so 7,000 points in multi-core. That's about the performance of the A17 Pro at much, much higher power consumption, I might add. Now, this should be noted, this is a 4 nanometer build of the X4. So technically, maybe they could get more out of it, or at least make it more efficient. But then in terms of single core performance, this is where it's like 2 generations behind even the A17 Pro chip. Again, even if they get it to like 2,400 points or something like that, that would put it behind chips like the A16. So yeah, really not the most encouraging picture here. Again, and you can also see Samsung also doesn't go too crazy on cooling in comparison to some counterparts, Chinese counterparts. You see the stability is not great. This is hopefully now granted this is a GPU test. What's the actual CPU? Did they not use to test CPU sustained performance? The S24 Ultra exhibited massive thermal throttling in our testing and lost a huge chunk of its maximum performance over time, a whopping 53%. That's why 47% is left. CPU-based throttling isn't quite as bad, 35% loss, but it's still far from ideal. So you see that the CPU itself wants to get to like 8, 9, 10 watts. So, and probably by limiting it by 35%, you kind of have the power usage to like 4 to 5 watts. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. Maybe again N3 will help along. And there is also the question, will like a chip like the Dimensity 9500, for example, will it be built on N3E or will it be on N3P, similar to what's expected on the iPhone A19 and the A19 Pro chips? But it's really such a weird thing to see that we even have to think about an X4 core in 2025 as like the main P core. Um, Riley, Apple will still try to give double-digit performance in September. Yeah, like, well, double-digit isn't actually too difficult. Well, for the GPU, I'm almost guaranteeing you will be seeing at the very least like 15 to 20%. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw 25% or more. For one, Apple can leverage faster memory, right? We already see Apple using 8533 memory on the M4 Pro and M4 Max. So it would be easy to switch from 8 gigabytes of 7500 memory to 12 gigabytes of 8533 memory. Hell, who knows, 10700 or a larger memory bus to help along. And then, of course, we've discussed rumors about like the use of HBM memory and other technologies in the future that could help along. But also just we are kind of overdue a little bit of a GPU boost. We are also just getting improvements just based on the thermal solution. So this is supposedly Apple's first year utilizing a vapor chamber design. The iPhone 17 and 17 Pro Max are also supposed to be thicker than the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, heavier, larger battery, so Apple could feel more at ease by giving it slightly higher power consumption, especially sustained. So yeah, plus again, if we are actually moving from N3 to N3P, that's like 5% at the very least should be like higher clocked. And then on the CPU side, yeah, 10% at the very least. M4 base is 7500. I know. The A18, A18 Pro and the base M4 are both 7500. But I'm saying Apple is already familiar with building memory controllers for 8533. I think it would be weird if Apple didn't give us faster memory. Then again, I don't care too much about memory. I would prefer double the cache or something like that, but that's just going to be egregiously expensive. But yeah, Riley, you're well informed. Good. Keep me accountable when I'm getting something wrong, but also don't assume that I'm getting something wrong. I specifically said they're using it on the M4 Pro and M4 Max. And not on the freaking M3 Ultra. That's the crazy part. The M3 Ultra isn't even using 7500, which I'm sure if you overclock the memory controller, you could have easily gotten there. Like, it's still using 6400 megatransfers per second memory. That's so, like, at 800 gigabits per second, it's fast. It's slower than, like, what, the RTX 5070 Ti? No. Yeah, definitely slower than the 50. Is it slower than the actual like 5070? 5070 Ti bandwidth. That should be on a 256-bit bus, right? Yeah, that's 896 gigabytes. So the 5070 has a 192-bit bus, so that would be a quarter less. So we're looking at what, like 680 or something like that? 672. Yeah, a bigger die could help definitely with stuff like cooling. Also, just give you more GPU cores. I know that like Sam Hine, who's also like a viewer of this channel, has been like calling for Apple to build larger dies, also for the A series chip. Then also for the memory controllers, yes, you do usually use a larger die, not definitely for like a larger memory bus, but sometimes just for faster memory too, because the memory controllers don't scale too well over time, from one, the bus width, but also just the components that you need to handle the data inflow. So if the memory gets a lot faster, there might come a point where Apple is like, you know what, we might just be better off using slightly slower memory, but make the die also smaller, right? That will keep cooling a little down, that will allow us to use actually a little bit less like thermal mass, and all of that will like reduce cost. We see, and it's gonna give you a longer battery life. We see that with the Nintendo Switch 2. The Nintendo Switch 2 actually features 8533 memory, but it's clocked in a way that it's actually designed in docked mode, so that's its highest performance mode, to get 6400 mega transfers, and in its portable mode, handheld mode, it's actually 4300, 4400, no, 4233, right? It's basically It's basically a chip that's LPDDR5X, but it clocks down to LPDDR5 speeds in docked mode, and it clocks down to LPDDR4X speeds in handheld, because that dramatically reduces power consumption, heat. And they just, even in docked mode, they just cannot handle 8533. In fact, we see with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, we've seen variants with 8533 memory, and we saw variants with 10700 memory. And we saw that 10700 does not perform noticeably better than variants with 8533 memory. So it might just be that technically supporting a certain memory speed does not actually allow you to leverage all that speed, right? If you're just using the same memory controller but slightly overclocked, you might be actually creating additional latency, some potential crosstalk that needs to be like figured out then later on. So yeah, memory is much more complicated than just memory amount, bus width, and memory speed. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion to be had. Like, with the Tensor G5, for example, we know that it's going to use like an off-the-shelf design for like a memory controller, but then it's going fully in-house for the image signal processor. So the combination of all of that part, that back-end design that Geekervan kept mentioning when we watched their Xiaomi X-Ring 01 review, that is going to be very crucial. For example, when we are talking about memory bandwidth, one thing that has been very crucial for Apple's success for its CPU designs is that on their large chips, they give you a lot more memory, which traditionally, of course, they would, because they have much larger GPUs. But they also make sure that the CPU still keeps most of the access to the GPU, right? Because like a lot of people think just because it's an SoC, it can magically, like every part can leverage all the memory bandwidth, all the cache. That's just not true. You need to literally draw complicated communication lines on the die to make sure that the CPU has access to the memory, the GPU has access to the memory. All of them can pool together in one like system level cache or some kind of form of shared L3 cache, right? It's very complicated, and quite honestly, I don't really trust Google too much with that. So yeah, this is an old rumor, and there is like some slightly newer version of it that keeps the same details on the CPU and the GPU front. But yeah, I'm still not super excited about Pixels, I have to say. To get me super excited, I would need to hear that it actually has will be like a 1025 X25 core. To be mildly excited, it would be like, oh, it's a good implementation of the X925. But hearing that it's an X4 and hearing that the GPU is like this random imagination technologies thing, it's like, yikesy. But yeah, that's also still though not the last part of chip rumors that we've talked about. I mean, we talked about the Dimensity 9500. We talked about the M3 Ultra, right? So this is a very chip heavy episode. But last, oh, wait, did I close again? No, I actually put it here. Last, kind of least, we have the rumor that the Galaxy Z Flip 7 or Z Flip 7, however you choose to pronounce it, will be powered by the Exynos 2500 in most places. So most likely not the United States. Riley saying, I never liked Tensor chips. It's so bad it makes Samsung chips look good, which is hilarious because they use the same node. Like a lot of people have blamed Samsung in the past, right? For like the inefficiency of the Tensor processors and the low single core performance, and people were saying, oh, that's a result of the 4nm design, right? But then Samsung brought out their own 4nm chips. Maybe they're like 1/8 of a node further, right? And they performed noticeably better. So yeah, really is a combination of, for one, not the greatest node, but really like not the greatest backend designed by Google. Maybe now that they're adopting a more advanced node, maybe they will be able to hire more people who can get more excited. But usually we talk about how these companies have unlimited money. And that is true for Apple, Google, Microsoft. But don't forget, there is a limited amount of talent out there. And a lot of talent right now wants to be at NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, right? Companies that are making AI or companies that are trying to expand into different businesses. And even Samsung is trying a few new things here and there. So yeah, it's really a shame the way Google kind of went about their chip design. So supposedly the Exynos 2500 encountered problematic yield issues because it was kind of supposed to be coming to well, it was supposed to come to more of the Galaxy S25 lineup. It's not happening. Now it's kind of like coming to India. Whether or not it's coming for Europe, because Europe has been notoriously a target for Exynos chips in the past. However, it seems like sales in Europe have picked up for Samsung after the switch to Qualcomm processors, so it might not be worth saving the money to put it on the Exynos 2500 if it means potentially losing a very high value market for them. Right? So this is actually a 3nm part, right? It's designed on Samsung first generation GAFET technology. So that's something that we're only expecting to see from TSMC based processors late next year, and from Intel like late this year to early next year once they officially release like processors based on the A18 node or 18A. I forget where they put their A. So TSMC will kind of be last to launch their first generation GAFET node. It should be noted that this is also like a more refined 3nm from Samsung, because they do have a first generation 3nm that is inside the Galaxy Watch. And it's not the efficiency revolution that you kind of would hope from the terrible 4nm nodes in the past to now a bleeding edge 3nm node. But then again, this should be better than the node used in the Galaxy Watch. So, and supposedly only now do they have enough inventory of the Exynos 2500 to put it in the next flip, and not even everywhere. So that should tell you what the yield issues are still there, right? They're not targeting to put it in the Fold. They're not targeting to put it in other products for now. What it means for like potentially the Exynos 2600 next year, whether it could actually be competitive with the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2, the Dimensity 9500, the Xiaomi X-Ring 02 at that point, I couldn't tell you, but it will be pretty interesting to see. What is interesting to anybody who's really fascinated by the business side of our tech discussions, right, is consider what it slowly starts to mean for Qualcomm and why they try to so aggressively push their chips, for example, into laptops. Right, think about it. Let's say Samsung actually fully succeeds and the Exynos 2500 is not a disappointment, it's okay. But then the Exynos 2600 is like more efficient, more powerful than the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2. That's a big blow to potentially using half of Samsung's flagship lineup. But let's say Samsung then gets so convinced by their own chips that by the time they move to the Galaxy S27, they like build it fully on the Exynos 2700. That's at the time when a lot of Chinese brands like Vivo are adopting MediaTek processors, right? The Dimensity 9400. We talked about the Dimensity 9500 coming up. Think about Xiaomi, a big customer of Snapdragon chips, now having their own processor. And let's even say that for the next 2 years or so, they might not feel comfortable in like making ultra devices that are on their own chip rather than on Qualcomm. Okay, so Qualcomm retains that business. But a big part of Qualcomm's business are all the mid-range devices that Xiaomi builds. In those devices, it's very easy to build a chip that's better than like a Snapdragon 7 Gen 3 because Qualcomm really likes their high profit margins and they achieve those by making those chips pretty mediocre and by relying on the fact that nobody else outside of MediaTek is building something like this. Xiaomi could now say, oh, we didn't sell too many of the Xiaomi 15S Pro. We still have X-Ring 01 chips running around, right? Instead of building a brand new mid-range device, a chip, or maybe we even will do that as well down the road. But how we give our new flagships the X-Ring 02, but our new mid-range devices, just a slightly binned or slightly lower clocked version of the X-Ring 01 that maybe wasn't good enough for our flagship this year. That's a big blow potentially for Qualcomm. According to a report, TSMC has a much better transistor density. Yes. By the way, I am not talking about this 3 nanometer node coming even close to Samsung 2 nanometer, to TSMC 2 nanometer. It should be noted, of course, that by the time TSMC 2 nanometer launches late next year, Samsung will be kind of responding to that with like a 3rd or 4th generation 3 nanometer node in early 2027, right? So we don't know how the density looks like in subsequent versions of Samsung 3 nanometer. I know they tried to rebrand it into 2 nanometer for the future with barely any density improvements. And there are also questions, by the way. Density does not always result in better efficiency. That's just not true. We see that a lot of times. Granted, it's hard to compare x86 to ARM chips, but we see that between obviously Apple's N3B chips and Intel's N3B chips. So, but then we see like TSMC N3E, for example, has a lower density than N3B, but it's actually more efficient and clocks better. So the way you optimize your transistors to react to voltage and stuff like that, that in the end is the most important part. And that's something that Samsung has not excelled at in recent years, no matter what their density is. But let's think a little bit more positively for a moment about what Samsung could do here. And that is the actual specification of the 2500. What's important, they are this website is getting this wrong. They're calling it the X5 CPU, so they're referring here to the X925. So there will be actually in a similar situation to the Pixel, but better, right? Where they will be later this year in the second half, about the time when we are expecting like X1025 CPU cores, we'll be getting an X925 CPU core. And then Pixel, always the odd man out, will not give us even that, but they'll give us the X4. So thank you, Samsung, for not at least being as bad as Pixel. Yeah, Apple dropped 1 billion transistor on 18 Pro and still made the better chip. Yeah, like N3E versus N3B was really a stupid discussion where people were like, N3E is a cheap node and whatever. No, it's a smarter node. It's the definition of work smarter, not harder. If TSMC was able to, like TSMC really tried to push N3B kind of almost like into GAFA density territory, right? But still on FinFET. And what kind of resulted from that is that those transistors said, like, you know what, we're just simply not capable of that density. You're actually going to make us like thermally unstable because you might create crosstalk between fucking transistors, right? So yeah, N3E, definitely I ended up being very positively surprised by it. And who knows, maybe this node, now that its yield issues are fixed, will surprise me again. It probably won't blow my socks off because it will launch like in July, so 2 months from now, with a core design that was originally introduced exactly a year ago and then finalized in September of last year. And then Google will obviously do even worse by launching a phone later than this with a 2-generation old core design. They're saying it could clock from 3.2 to 3.3 gigahertz. That's not too encouraging given that the X925 cores is kind of like a 3.6 gigahertz CPU core, kind of even more like a 3.8 if you push it. So this does not suggest that, at least in terms of clock speed, Samsung believe that their 3nm node can match what Apple is doing. The A17 Pro is good on my iPad. It's all good. The A17 Pro is a good chip. N3B is a good node. Contrary to what people like Vadim from MaxTech are saying, it's like the M2 chip is a good example. It's a small node refinement. It came out roughly 18 months after the M1, but that's probably because it came out in a redesigned MacBook Air. So maybe it could have come out actually substantially earlier, because don't forget, it also came out during the pandemic. So it had to deal with low supplies. But when you actually look at the improvements from N5 to N5P, they make perfect sense, right? You can clock it higher. You can benefit from roughly 5% more efficiency. It is denser, right? For the fact that it features like 20% more GPU cores. DM2 is not actually dramatically larger than DM1. It also features like new encoders for stuff like ProRes, which the base M1 chip didn't do, right? And N3E is kind of that to N3B, but in a surprising way, because it doesn't achieve that with density, but just with like core architect. Well, when I say core, it sounds like I mean the core architecture. So it's more of like a foundational level, like the actual transistors are better, even if they aren't smaller. I stopped watching his channel. Yeah, if you notice, I actually haven't reacted to MaxTech in a while. I think sometimes they used to do really good stuff when they like deep dived into, my brain is starting to malfunction. I'm low on sugar. When they deep dived or deep dove? Now my brain is really, really firing on zero cylinders. Into like WWC, all the developer talks, right, where Apple gave us more details about the M1 APIs and everything. I think while they don't really have the expertise to provide that analysis, at least they tried. These days, I feel like they're making up new master plans for years in the future out of nothing, not even by doing some kind of research. He and that guy does giveaways every video are getting annoying. I don't even know who gives. I don't watch too many channels. Like, I sometimes watch Greg's Gadgets for kind of to see what like a baseline perspective is along the very positive, pro Apple community, right? Dove or pigeon, exactly. Max Tech Dove into this. I appreciate that. I also like dad jokes. But like I don't like I used to watch a little bit of Luke Miami, but then again he focused very much on like some DIY stuff and repairing older Macs. I didn't give too much of a fuck about that in the long run. That's not to attack those content creators. Greg's Gadget is more positive than I am and less interested in the technical details. That's completely fine. He's probably actually more representative of the broader customer base than I am. Luke Mayeni represents those that are a little bit more interested in the DIY aspect, which I am not almost at all. Well, I am, but on hardware that actually is designed for DIY, not Apple tech. Yeah, so we got distracted. So Cortex X925, 3.2 to 3.3 gigahertz. So that would probably make it at around 2,700 points in Geekbench. So give me the Vivo X200 Pro. Give me the review for it. And let's actually look at performance. So it features the single core performance. Yeah, it features the X925 core on an N3E node. Clock to what? 3.6 gigahertz? I believe it is. Do they? They should have like screenshots of Geekbench for it. Do they not? Oh, there it is. 3.63 gigahertz. Right. So this would be 10% roughly lower clock than this, especially if it's more at 3.2 rather than 3.3 gigahertz. So, okay. But then it would also have two Cortex A725. So those are the cores that are performing pretty well in the Xiaomi X-Ring 01. Then another 5 Cortex A725 cores. So I assume those would be clocked very differently, similar to what we saw with the different kind of A725 cores in the X-Ring 01. And it would also have like basically super low power cores with the Cortex A520. So decidedly very much in the realm of the X-Ring 01 or the Dimensity 9400, except for the 725 instead of the A720 on the 9400. So it's not going to be a disappointment outright in the terms of core that it uses. It's also a 10-core CPU, similar to the X-Ring 01, rather than the 8 cores on the 8 Elite. So, yeah, going to be very interesting to see how exactly they, for one, what they do with the backend design, how good their refined 3nm node is. I doubt it's going to be amazing, given that it's not coming to the Z Flip, to the Z Fold 7. But granted, the Z Fold 7 is supposed to be getting some design improvements and stuff like that. It's going to be much thinner, supposedly. So maybe they just are afraid of potentially not being able to cool this, which seemingly they think the 8 Elite is going to be better at. even though we just saw that it's pretty difficult to cool it in a product like the Galaxy S25 Edge. Yeah, so that's about it for today. We talked about a lot of different topics, didn't we? Let us have a last glimpse of the major Apple websites. This is why I wanted to talk with you today. For one, I'm not quite sure if I'll be able to stream tomorrow, but also if we get like a Galaxy S25 Edge in-depth video review, I would like to watch that with you. What's the A520 for increased core count? Yeah, it's kind of that because it's so small. You can put 2 of those or sometimes even 4 of those, and they will be like, still smaller than an X925 core, right? They have very little cache. I guess if the system was like if Apple were to make, let's say not 2 but 4 really really low power cores, right, I would be able to, and let's say they add them, let's say they have 2 power cores, 2 performance cores, 2 E cores, and 2 LPE cores is what Intel calls their most low power efficiency cores, right? Let's say Apple gave us an 8-core design that way. Now, let's say they use that to clock their E-cores much higher. So they are actually much more capable of helping out their P-cores. Similar to how the A725 cores are way better at assisting their P-core on the chips than the A720 used to be, right? So my question is, if Apple does it, or my speculation is, if Apple did something similar to the A520, I would assume that it would be like a 4-core cluster designed to really efficiently deal with like Wi-Fi data coming in, storage controllers, all that stuff, right? Basically overseeing stuff that is happening anyway, because ideally you would also have like an E-core on your like your 5G or your Wi-Fi modem too anyway. But that would require an Apple level control of the operating system and a little bit more power, similar to what Apple has, over developers. I'm not sure that it makes that much sense on Android. I think A725 makes a lot of sense. It's a lot more powerful than A720. It's much better at assisting their P cores than before, and they're still very efficient. And when you don't need them to assist the P cores, you just clock them lower, right? At which point they're even more efficient. That's great. But the A520 cores, in theory, could be even better at the super low power tasks, but you would need to really have like a really great controller on the chip that knows, oh, this task, that one needs the A500 cores. This task needs a mix of A700 and A500 cores. This task needs a mix of P cores and middle cores, right? This part can actually benefit from only the P cores and the LPE cores, right? So we don't even need to activate the A700 cores because we don't need the extra threads. But I don't know if any Android manufacturer could create that kind of system level control. I'm just not sure about it. I'm not even down talking. Like, I'm not sure that Google could do that on the Pixel, because even if you have control over the operating system, you still will be left in a situation where you have very little control over third-party applications, which make up the vast majority of apps that people use. Yeah, but again, that's purely speculative. I'm not saying Apple is going to design such cores. I'm not saying that A500 cores are going entirely away, though we have seen chips launching without those kinds of cores, basically saying we are better off giving you like one more middle core and then clocking some of them down a lot lower. And like here, yeah, this actually looks like, oh, the other chips are like 8-core designs. Well, ours is a 10-core. But what are our last 2 cores? Oh, they're A520 cores. Who cares? Yeah, so I fully get what you mean here. Yeah, but once again, that's about it for today. Don't see any new leaks and rumors that we might have skipped. My voice is slightly slowly giving out. Plus, I need some food in me. So thank you guys to anyone who joined. Thank you again to Steve for the generous super chat, to Riley for the generous amount of chat messages. Just in general, to anyone who joins now or watches afterwards. As always, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment, don't just comment live, but also comment afterwards. That helps with the algorithm, helps attract new people to the community. And of course, whenever you catch me live, consider leaving a super chat or super sticker. Consider becoming a channel member. Shout out to Steve, Angelica, and Max Maximus, our MarkTech Pro Max members. And you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Hope you enjoyed the very varied talk we had today. I'll see you guys soon. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. This is MarkTech tuning out. And you get big Mark at the very end here, like even bigger Mark. Bye, guys.